Hello, welcome back to the YouTube channel of Bethel Evangelical Free Church Hanley. I'm Pastor Gervais Charmley, and this is another Shropshire Hills church. This is the church of St Edith, Eaton-Under-Heywood. In this case, Eaton refers to St Edith's township or St Edith's farmstead. The church is dedicated to St Edith, who was an Anglo-Saxon princess, like so many female Anglo-Saxon saints. And although there's no record of the church in the Domesday Book, the fact it's dedicated to an Anglo-Saxon saint does lead to the suggestion that there was a church here before the Norman Conquest. However, the earliest parts of the present building are 12th century. You can see it's quite an interesting structure. We've got here this interesting painted tympanum here, and then nice timber roof, and then behind me, so I'll just move to one side, there is the pulpit, which is a three-decker, which is always nice. I do like the three-decker pulpits, as you know if you've watched any of the videos here that's involved three-decker. I think they've taken one of the decks out of this one, but we'll have a look. It's been a while since I was last here, so let's look around. As usual, we start at the back, and we start with the font. Lovely font here, nice Norman tub there, and then you've got this 19th century top that is has this ball and chain affair, and of course that's a weight, which means that the cover can be relatively easily lifted, and it will, if lifted, stay in there. I'm not going to try to do that because I don't want to damage it. I don't want to cause unnecessary trouble. Looking west, in fact, first of all, look up here. Here we have a Norman window. Very nice window, and the east end you've got Christ the Good Shepherd and Christ receiving, the west window rather, you've got Christ receiving little children and Christ the Good Shepherd. So we'll carry on around. Obviously the walls have been scraped of plaster. Originally there would have been wall plaster, it would have been painted in imitation of ashlar. We've got here another one of these Norman windows. You see how small they are. That's St John the Evangelist in there. I don't think you can see it on the video though. So William Pinches and Mary and Ticklerton became really the centre here of the parish. There's very little actually in the way of houses in Eaton, just the old rectory, the church here, and the manor house. And here you've got three coats of arms there, and this wooden ceiling, which is 15th, 16th century pulpit. Yes, they have removed the middle deck. The pulpit is Jacobean, as so many of them are, of course. And it's a really good example. You can almost picture an old Puritan in there, preaching away. There would have been an hourglass. There isn't one visible now, but there would have been an hourglass that he would have used to time his sermons. We hope the story is apocryphal of the preacher who, when the hourglass ran out, said, "We're all good fellows here, let's have another glass." Partly because that's, of course, a joke about drinking too much, but then again, of course, the Puritans were much less well, they were a bit more relaxed about these things, not in terms of drunkenness, but in terms of actual consumption. And they preached against drunkenness, of course. It's quite a narrow pulpit. It's quite typical of these very early pulpits, but it's a really, really good piece there. And here the lower desk is also really good. That bit there is obviously Victorian, but the actual desk itself is really good. No, it is, I think, intact. I think you've got here, this would be the parish clerk, and this would be the minister's desk. So that's very good. Here's the Reverend Thomas Gwynn, AM, that is Artis Magister, Master of Arts, late vicar of this parish, who died May 2nd, 1799, aged 33 years. If honest worth with charity combined, deserve the dear remembrance of mankind, here may the worthy drop the tender tear, for such was his desert who slumbers here. So, I mean, it's very, very much, the automatic lighting has gone off, there we are. It's very much of the period, that kind of well, it's being polite and all that. But let's get into the chancellor here. Here we have a 14th century tomb recess. Now, on this tomb recess, we have decorating it. We'll look at the effigy in a minute. One of the most famous 14th century decorative symbols, the ball flower. The ball flower. The more 14th century churches you look at, the more you recognise the ball flower. And you can see it's basically, it is a ball with it's always three petals around it. So it may or may not be based on actual flowers, but it's a decorative device, the ball flower. And it is so typical of the period. It's, of course, some of the Victorians reuse them, but it's found a lot in Herefordshire in particular, but you can find them in Lincolnshire, you can find them in Northamptonshire, you can find them in, and obviously in Shropshire here. But the ball flower is your typical 14th century decorative feature. Now, the 14th century period of English pointed architecture, known as Gothic. It's not got nothing to do with the Goths. It's a rude name is applied to it, shall we say. The 14th century 14th century period in architecture in England is known as decorated. And it's called decorated because the desire to apply these sort of decorative symbols, decorative devices to every single surface. Now, in this, we have this rather wonderful wooden effigy of a layman. You can see he's got his cap on, fastened under his chin. He's, of course, lying down in this prayerful position. This is a typical position, of course, for a funerary effigy. There's nothing strange or unusual about it. And if anyone thinks it is, that's just something they know nothing about medieval funerary effigies. It's unusual to find a layman like this. Normally, you find knights or you find clerics. But this man, and it's a very simple outfit as well. Obviously, he's somebody relatively wealthy because he's able to have an effigy like this. If you were a poor man, you didn't have any memorial, you'd have a little wooden cross in the graveyard that would rot away, and that would be it. But this man, obviously, let's say local wealthy farmer by the look of him. We don't know who he was, but here he lies as he has for hundreds of years, and no one's damaged it. It's a very lovely, lovely effigy. Above we have a later memorial. This is to the glory of God in memory of Alan Bertram Hanbury Sparrow, who died 28th of September 1936, aged 73 years, and of his son Brian, killed in war at Baku, 26th of August 1918, aged 21 years. Again, I mean, you got there, you see St. Francis of Assisi standing, one suspects, for the father, and then St. George for England standing for the son who's killed. Who's a King's Shropshire Light Infantry, given got the KSLI there. Really nice ceiling. I mean, the ceiling has got these lovely carved bosses on it. Beautifully adorned, got these faces around the outside. And so it's just a glorious church here. Really is. Now, here we have Arthur Sparrow, later of Preen Manor. We've been to Church Preen as an earlier one. He's also Lord of the Manor of Eaton-Under-Heywood. So he's 1898. The manor house here now is a holiday let. The pulpit says very definitely no access to the public. Quite right too. I can imagine people wanting to be photographed. Didn't you see of course ministers being photographed in Calvin's pulpit and so on. And these older pulpits, particularly this one, dated 1670. So it is, at least the top end is actually post-restoration. It does look like that's going to be a restoration. I can't believe that the lower part of that pulpit is as late as 1670. No, that's just the tester, just the board on top, the canopy, having been restored about that date. It's much too early for that. So it's a marvellous little building. 12th century, you've got a bit of a batter on the walls. Also, that wall is leaning outwards. I can tell because the window's leaning outwards as well. Just see out there into this lovely Shropshire hills. It's one of the more elevated Shropshire Hills churches, this. So we'll just go back out of the actual sanctuary area, past the communion rails. Lovely communion rails too here, of course. And it's a marvellous structure. Obviously that altar is Victorian. The woodwork behind includes, is basically 17th century panelling, but I suspect it comes from the manor house or the rectory rather than having been made for the church here. Now, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if part of that pulpit was medieval, actually. I don't think it is, but it's the right kind of size. No, 1670 is just the top. That pulpit itself is not 1670, it's much, much older. And yes, that window does lean outwards somewhat. The tower is offset on the south side. You can see it here. And we just go inside. You can, as you can see, the open access here. You've got a couple of memorials in here, a couple of bell ropes, I think 2 bells, and access, obviously not for the general public because it would be quite dangerous. So, this is something you often find at Anglican churches, a table of kindred and affinity, wherein whosoever are related are forbidden by the Church of England to marry together. So a man may not marry his mother, his daughter, his father's mother, his mother's mother, his son's daughter, his daughter's daughter, his sister, his father's daughter, his mother's daughter, his wife's daughter, his wife's mother, his wife's daughter, his father's wife, his son's wife, his father's father's wife, and so on. And it was required for these to be displayed in every church, just to remind people these are the people you were not supposed to be marrying. And then we have that lovely, lovely tomb recess. Marvellous building, this. We'll go outside now and have a look at the outside, which is also, in its own way, very interesting. And so here we are outside at Eaton-Under-Heywood. It's a lovely, lovely, solid Norman tower there. And those Norman openings. And you've got these pointy bits, these pinnacles on top of the tower. When it was built, it would have been the single grandest building for miles. And it really is impressing the peasants that this is the house of God. This is the place, the most important place in the entire village. Well, we'll have a look around the outside, point out some other features like this lovely tower. So, of course, the function of the tower, first of all, you've got the bells up there. Obviously, people can get up there. It could be used as a lookout point. It's quite an elevated position. We've got the hill over here. But over towards Wales, which, of course, back in the day would be where any danger would come from, there's very good view. So up there, you'll be able to see the Welsh coming for miles. It's a nice doorway at the bottom of the tower, which should allow access for the bell ringer, as well as for the priest. And I expect that lower part would have been used as vestry, because it's what you do. And perhaps in the Middle Ages, the middle stage might have been actually where the priest lived at times, because Middle Ages, you're talking after all about celibate priest, single man, and doesn't need a lot in the way, won't have a lot in the way of books, so that's great. You could keep your priest up there. It's quite a spacious room, I expect. East end, we've got this lovely triple lancet arrangement, and from the outside you can see those are medieval lancets, so this isn't a Victorian restoration. The chancel doesn't seem to have been too altered since the 12th century, but they have put those 3 in to replace what I expect would have been a single smaller lance, because that's generally what's there. If you can see through there, but you can just about see the bell frame through that window there. And of course those pinnacles originally would have been pointy. And when it was new, it would have been covered in plaster that would then have been whitewashed, so it would have stood out for miles as this white building gleaming on the horizon. And now it's this, there's a certain humble nature to it, and its little windows, and And it very much feels now the kind of little building. See that that wall there bulging out with this whacking great buttress that's been put in there. You've got to do that. It's on the side of a hill, and the thing is that the side of the hill has just been moving down slightly, and it's made the church lean over. Medieval masons didn't have the luxury, and it is a luxury that we have, of structural surveys before building. So you've had to have these 3 massive great buttresses built up here to make sure that this church doesn't just come crashing down. So you've got this great big 14th century window there, and then you've got these tiny, tiny, tiny little Norman windows. And what a difference between the 14th century. 14th century, of course, you've got glass, and that would have been filled with stained glass in the 14th century. There's a few fragments at the top still there, whereas the Normans, they don't have glass at all. So you've got these little tiny windows that are going to be open to the elements, and they're small on the outside, small as possible on the outside, to admit a useful amount of light, a fairly useful amount of light, but also then to admit as little rain and snow as possible. And of course that's where wind doors come from, because they did let the wind in originally. And you can see here again, and here's the north doorway, which has been, that's 14th century there, very good, or maybe 13th century, very good. And again here where they've had to do stuff with it because it was falling down, because that's what happens when you build with inscription foundation on the side of a hill, but that's life. So that is the outside. See, and they've had to rebuild this bit up to support it. Structural engineers are a wonderful blessing, and the roof is these great big stone slabs, quarried locally of course, and they do weigh an awful lot. The roof of the main building has been replaced with tile, but originally it would all have been, well, if it wasn't thatched, it would have been these big stone slabs, and that again is going to have affected it, and that's one of the reasons it's going to be moving downhill like that. Again, Norman window on the outside, and this memorial to Stephen Oxbold of Ticklerton, obviously important person with something like that. And then we're back by the tower and the tower door, and obviously this would have been the vestry. It's still quite common to find that the bottom of the tower acts the vestry as well as the ringing area. And so there you have it, St Edith's, Eaton-Under-Heywood. It is a gorgeous building, and there's so much history here, from the Normans through the 14th century with that wonderful figure in there, and through into the post-Reformation period with that pulpit, and through of course into the modern era. Well, thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this. I have enjoyed coming out here again. It's been years since I was last here. So thank you for watching, and may God bless you and keep you until the next time.